Caldera has just announced the Metalayer. We've talked a lot about how we see RaaS providers as the modular vending machine where builders can go in and pick and choose which service they want, which modular infra parts they want to build their rollup with. In today's pod, we talked about the state of RaaS, whether or not it's going to be commoditized down to zero, the modular vending machine idea, Matt's thoughts on shared sequencing and where the modular ecosystem goes from here, as well as some of the general sentiment around building new rollups and launching new block space, whether or not we have too much block space, and more. This is our second time having Matt on the show. It was an absolute pleasure. Hope you guys enjoy, and let's dive right in after a quick word from our sponsors. Mantle is a layer 2 blockchain with one of the biggest on-chain treasuries in all of crypto, and they have a 100-day campaign called Metamorphosis live now. What this is it is a campaign for their liquid staked ETH token, METH, as well as their upcoming liquid restaking token, CMETH, where you can utilize this token on the Mantle network in a variety of different apps, some of your favorite restaking protocols and DeFi protocols, and earn yields in the form of powder, which will eventually be turning into a governance token. Mantle's been around for a while. We like them because they use their own form of EigenDA. They have a good ecosystem and they're growing. So check out this 100-day Metamorphosis campaign and hope you guys enjoy the rest of this video.
Cartesi is your home for app-specific rollups. At the forefront of developing new tools and platforms that enhance the capabilities of blockchain technology, Cartesi enables applications that are flexible and built to scale. Build on a full Linux environment and use traditional software libraries, but in blockchain development. Go to cartesi.io, that's cartesi.io, to learn more about building your own app chain today.
Welcome back to the Rollup. Today we have the podcast with our friend Matt from Caldera. Have some interesting topics today. For us, it's like thinking about this idea of a RaaS provider being a vending machine for the modular blockchain parts, and also kind of understand the business model of RaaS, how it's progressed, and kind of where Matt sees it going, and more. Rob's in Brussels already. Looking forward to ECC. By the time this is out, be after ECC, so I'm sure all of us hopefully won't be too sick, but Matt, looking forward to seeing you there as well, and welcome in, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, cheers. I think we did a last one maybe almost a year ago, or a little bit less than a year ago, and a lot has kind of changed then. For those of our audience who are new to Caldera, I would love to just kind of have a brief overview of your role and kind of your view of what Caldera is and kind of why RaaS is an important component to the modular stack.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Matt, co-founder, CEO of Caldera. I'm an engineer by training, though, so that means I kind of have a hand in everything, right? Everything from go-to-market to building to supporting a lot of the builders that are working on Caldera. In short, I like to think of Caldera as like the kind of way to build modular blockchains. You put it really well, Andy, when you called it kind of like a vending machine. Basically, we are the infrastructure platform layer for like everything in the modular stack. So if you're like a developer and you want to build a blockchain on the modular stack, there are all these different components. You know, there's obviously Rollup framework itself, right? OP, Arbitrum, ZK Sync, Polygon CDK. There's the DA layer, right? Celestia, Eigen, Nuffle, right? Avail. You might look into shared sequencing layers, now chain abstraction layers, etc. We're basically the aggregator over all of these pieces of infrastructure that people use in the modular stack. So, you know, a team will come to us. They're pretty confident that they want to build a modular blockchain. Oftentimes, they know, you know, the properties of what they want, and we kind of help them get there. So we tend to ingest teams at, you know, a fairly early stage of development. They're like, we want to do modular stuff. And then we help them choose the stack. We help them choose the DA layer. We help them design their blockchain. And then we eventually launch and help them scale with that blockchain. So in some sense, you can think of us as like, you know, half like the AWS kind of platform layer for blockchains, and then also like have I don't know what to call like guides into the modular ecosystem in general.
The modular shepherd, or with the recent modular mullet conversation, you're like a barber shaping
Yeah.
cutting up the modular mullet haircuts for people. And you guys are in a pretty unique position because you see like you're at like this center of how all these pieces connect. And so I'm curious, we've talked about the fragmentation problem at length on the Rollup. And so, I'm curious, from your more nuanced perspective, what are some of the problems from connecting all of these tools together? Because it's not just easy to kind of have all this connective tissue that pulls everything together, makes it really easy and smooth. What has been your experience across 50 plus rollups that have launched on Caldera? What has been your experience trying to connect all these modular components together?
Yeah. So, you mentioned fragmentation. I think there's kind of like, there's two types of fragmentation here. One is more on the sort of technical side when you're building an individual rollup, and then one is like on the ecosystem, more broadly, and they are, somewhat connected. But first of all, like the whole, point of modularism is choice, and like that's really really good for users and builders. It's very annoying, right, for us because it means, right, you have like an n squared problem of like, you need to integrate every stack with every DA layer eventually, right? Like that's the vision, and then integrate that with other sequencing layers. And so there is just a lot of work in making sure all of that works to the degree that that it needs to. Of course, we've come so far in the last like year or so in the in the modular space, but everything is very nascent. It's unclear about like where the the boundaries should be. Like who should take point on alt DA? Should that be the creators of the stack, like an Optimism or Arbitrum? Should that be the alt DA provider? Should it be a RaaS? Currently, it's sort of like a multi-way dance to get those integrations done. And so that is like generally one of the tricky things about building modular. And it's one of the things that we like to like abstract away from our users. So it's kind of like partially it's annoying, but it's also kind of like a moat for the company. Like we've done it all before. We're the one putting in a lot of the engineering resources here to make sure everything works so that we abstract that away from our users. But you do get some fragmentation here across different standards, right? You will have like every rollup that launches might have a slightly different config, right? Nitro stack with Nuffle, OP stack with Eigen, OP stack with Plasma, ZK with its own Validium scheme. And so you see a lot of fragmentation on how people are designing their chains. And I think that, that kind of flows into the general fragmentation across the ecosystem. Like, go back a year and there were many people we talked to that like had the general thesis that like maybe the OP stack would just win, rollups in general. Like there will be new technical designs for rollups, but all of these teams that are like wanting to build app chains, maybe there will be, the OP stack or maybe just the OP and Arbitrum stack that will like own that category. That's, I think we always thought that was unlikely to be true. And as we're seeing in the ecosystem, that's not true. And so that means we do have significant, fragmentation across the ecosystem just in terms of the types of rollups. And that also means that a lot of the solutions that people might have come up with to really unify those rollups are only partial solutions, right? So like the OP superchain is incredible technology. I think it's unlikely that any Arbitrum stack chains are going to be able to join the OP superchain, of course. And so there'll be a lot of great interoperability properties within that sort of cluster. But we're still seeing fragmentation across multiple different clusters of rollups. And there isn't really a great solution to that currently, though a lot of people are working on it.
Yeah, there's been this like kind of back and forth between synchronous composability and asynchronous composability between these rollup clusters. And to kind of anticipate what you might say, I'm curious if you agree with this. I anticipate seeing synchronous composability but inside these clusters. Everyone on the super chain will have the same sequencer. Everyone in Arbitrum orbit will have the same sequencer. But then coordinating between clusters might take some chain abstraction or interoperability solutions that use intents and other solutions to communicate asynchronously. And so when you're building for rollups that may appear in these different clusters or maybe in the same cluster, how does that change your model for what you may suggest to a project, whether or not they're going to be part of some existing cluster or part of something entirely new and maybe even sovereign?
Yeah. So I think this is maybe kind of the hottest take that we as a company have. But we've always been fairly bearish on the idea of like widespread, like highly, available, like synchronous composability in any like real form across blockchains. It's a much harder problem. Like you mentioned, right? You might need to do something along the lines of like a shared sequencer. And then if you're doing a shared sequencer, there are other performance, reasons, like you are going to kind of take a performance hit because you now are sharing a sequencer with a bunch of other chains. And there are probably, in like project out like a decade from now, you can probably design these things in such a way where that performance hit is lessened and you have more flexibility. But like this is something where I feel like it's always been kind of like it's always been like 1 year away for quite some time. And we think it's just like a much more long-term problem. And as you mentioned, right, for a lot of the protocols we're working with, let's say someone's like building like a DEX and they want to bridge in tokens from many other chains, like even if there exists some really strong synchronous interoperability protocol, like you mentioned, it's not like it's going to likely be like double opt-in from both chains, right? The source chain and the destination chain. And you can't guarantee that, it's hard enough to make predictions about your own architectures of blockchain many years from now. It's very hard to guarantee that, if you want to bridge in from Optimism and Arbitrum, that both of them might be part of the same synchronous composability protocol. So for us, like when we advise teams, we tell them, generally try to operate under an asynchronous model. We haven't really seen any projects that require like highly synchronous composability. I think from an academic standpoint, it's very easy to come up with problems that would require this, but from a practical standpoint, there are always ways to work around it. Like the internet itself, operates, basically on an asynchronous model, and like, as a society, we've been able to use that to great effect. And so generally the teams we work with, we advise them, if you want like the widest reach, you have to design around asynchronicity.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's the angle that Vitalik took as well, I think, in one of his recent blog posts and X responses. And I think like the shared sequencing people may have different views or may have like a different way of thinking about it. Which kind of brings me to a question like, which is a little bit different kind of train of thought, but why couldn't I just spin up a Caldera and just charge less, or just have the same tech stack and just do things cheaper, and then like the next company does it and does it cheaper? Like, why is launching Rollups not just going to end up being like a zero revenue thing and just like something that is like commoditized completely?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's, I think, basically, in our 2.5 year history as a company, every time we've spoken to a VC, they ask that question. And it's a very fair question.
So you're used to answering it then.
Exactly. It's a really fair question because, what is RaaS, at the kind of like first degree take on RaaS is that RaaS, you're hosting other people's software for people, right? You're taking some open source software, putting it on the cloud, right? Like how hard could it be? Is there anything proprietary there? So I would say that the thing that we've found, just empirically from working in the space, again, over the last 2 years, is that first of all, rollup stacks are very hard and tricky to run. And there's a lot of like, sort of crystallized knowledge that you need in order to run these things effectively. We've seen some high profile cases of downtime with some RaaS providers and other rollups. And a lot of that comes down to needing to really be very aware of the architecture and how everything works whenever you're building all across the stack. Like our monitoring system, for example, that, even though that's like kind of like a Web2 component, right? You're just making sure things are live. You need to actually have like a Web3 engineer build that and someone who's familiar with rollups, because finalization, for example, which is a big issue with rollup reliability. If you don't pay attention to it, that is like an on-chain system. And so there's just like a lot of those kind of pieces. And those are all like pieces of proprietary software that we've built up over the years to, ensure that like our rollups stay up and they stay performant and they stay live. And like, there's just, so, there's just like a, menagerie of things kind of on that front that does give us like a technical moat and, increases like, improves the customer experience. And that's something like if you were a new entrant into the space, and we have been seeing some of them, some new entrants, like that's going to take a while for them to learn. And, for that reason, like we're still able to, I think, close generally like most of the deals that we see, just because like other people come to us and they say that most other RaaS providers that they might have checked out, they don't tick all the boxes because I think they just haven't spent as much time as we have working with these stacks. So that's like how things kind of currently are, and that's led to a lot of solid what we like to call kind of like pseudo network effects, like just like trust. Having more customers means more people trust us, which means it's easier for us to work with infrastructure providers. We can provide a standard interface to a layer 0 or like a third web. It makes it easier for those folks to kind of join our platform. And then so we have a really great flywheel there from like the business side on just generally like increasing the size of our ecosystem and connecting, different types of partners. Alongside, that, we're also working on some models to really allow, the chains that we're launching to collaborate and like interoperate. I think one of the most kind of strategic positions we're in, as you guys mentioned, like we have 50 plus teams we're working with, close to 20 mainnets at this point. And for us, the fact that we're sequencing all those chains, we're intimately familiar with the infrastructure that all those chains are running on, that gives us a really great position to like build additional solutions on top of what we currently have to like improve the user and customer experience on those chains.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier also that your competency is your moat, which I've heard other projects say, and I think that that's a particularly important thing that really can't be commoditized. And then once you do achieve that social flywheel that you mentioned through repeat customers and referral customers, you're able to continue that flywheel. And then eventually, now alluding to some of the potential network effects coming down the line, sound really, really exciting. And so kind of like looking a little bit broader here about, and you guys have already done a bunch of work in the space helping to build these rollups and connecting them with customers and users. I'm thinking a little bit more broadly about kind of like what you see out there. Like, do you think, and I know you're in the business, and I realize that you might be biased here, but like, do you think we're at a point of saturation where we have too many rollups? Like, there's a tweet going around like, oh boy, another rollup, it's like another AWS app, right? But like, that's not really what's going on here. So I'm curious from your perspective, do you think we've hit a point of saturation? And if, and I do have a follow-up here, but I'm curious just generally, like, have you seen that in the space?
Yeah, I think that's a very it's a very interesting question. I would say I think we're at a point of saturation for thinking that you can launch a random L2, run like maybe like a blast style campaign, right? Run like a growth yield farming campaign, and then launch at like a $3 billion FTV. Right, like that playbook I think has a fair bit of saturation. And I think for good reason that the market has like less and less appetite for that as it's become easier and easier. I think I would be surprised if anything different occurred. That said, I don't think you can take that and extrapolate that into like general saturation on the concept of like L2s. Right? As you mentioned, people make the analogy between L2s and AWS, like launching an AWS box. It's an imperfect analogy, but what L2s are ultimately is like they're a technology, they're a way of achieving certain goals, and like as long as those goals themselves are valuable to projects and enable them to do interesting things, like I don't think L2s are going to stop being deployed. At least from our perspective, as a company, like looking at our CRM, for example, like, it hasn't gone down. If anything, like the amount of deals we're closing, the amount of interest in rollups, the amount of new customers that are entering our pipeline has been pretty kind of, monotonically increasing over the course of the company's life cycle. And like that, it hasn't slowed down over the past 3 months, despite the fact like the market has certainly gone slower and there are fewer, launches and stuff happening. So like in general, I think the really great thing about this quote unquote saturation is it's going to force a lot of teams to innovate, both like the technical and the application level. But yeah, I'm still very, very bullish on a lot of the folks who are coming into our pipeline because they are using L2s for like truly kind of novel applications.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it
for
is.
novel applications, they're probably not launching general purpose L2s, right? Or are they? Is there still a strong demand to like launch a general purpose L2 and compete, even if it's optimistic or ZK? Like, is there still a lot of demand for that? Because I feel like that trend is like slowing while the app chain or app roll up trend is accelerating.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely true. We're seeing a lot more app rollups now than we did before. And again, like I think we expected this because there was a huge opportunity to launch like truly general purpose L2s for some time as the ETH community transitioned towards a rollup centric roadmap. Now, as that space has gotten filled out, people are going to move on to the next thing. We are still seeing some demand for what I would say is like general purpose or vertical specific L2s, but the teams that are launching those, I think they have real reason to be bullish on themselves. Like they have an existent, very strong community or an existent app that, quite reasonably they think will lead to like very, very strong distribution, or they have an extremely strong like geographical focus and like some sort of natural advantage in distribution to those areas. And so I think we'll see a lot more chains like that. But if you're like a new team that's trying to launch a chain and you don't have any of those advantages, there are very few teams like that anymore who are trying to run that book.
Covalent is solving the long-term data availability problem where a lot of the data availability providers today in the modular space, when you post data to them, they actually only hold that data for about 12 to 16 days. And then it's basically, they can go into an archive node, or oftentimes it's just kind of put away into the abyss. And what Covalent's trying to do is build this long-term data availability solution, which can plug into some of these modular data availability providers and provide this longer-term perpetual data solution. So what we try to think of this as is when you post transaction data onto Celestia or Veil or any of these modular DA solutions or even Ethereum, Covalent is able to provide a long-term data storage and data availability platform for that data after the time period. Blockchains are billboards, not databases, and we need these providers in the space to be able to kind of hold on to the long-term data that is provided from these providers and these blockchain state. This is where Covalent comes in. They just had a nice rebrand. Check them out on Twitter as well as the website. Thank you for being here. Hope you enjoy the rest of the show. Everclear is pioneering the clearing layer. The clearing layer can almost be thought of as splitwise when you go on a trip with friends, but for the blockchain. What I mean by that is when users are sending cross-chain messages, there's oftentimes fillers and solvers who have balances left on different chains that they need to rebalance and reset their positions. This is where Everclear comes in. Everclear is pioneering a collaborative approach to the chain abstraction future, and they are willing to work with interoperability partners, solvers, and other providers in the space to build a interoperable and chain abstraction future. Check out Everclear at everclear.org, and welcome back to the Rollup.
Okay, so if you're speaking with a prospective roll-up company out there and they're looking to get into this business and maybe they have an existing business, I was thinking on the plane over here about two examples I think would go really well on blockchain, which are Zelle, for obvious reasons, payments, and then the second was Carfax, which is like information that is attributable to each vehicle and is very identifiable, and so information transfer for that reason. And so if you were kind of looking at that, what would you suggest to using those companies as an example? What would you suggest if they were coming in and they weren't sure about what blockchain to use, where to go. If they were to launch an app chain or on a general purpose, at a high level, what are some of the guidance and rails that you would suggest for companies that are kind of like first coming to the space but have an existing business in general?
Yeah. So I guess like it's interesting you give those two examples, because we have been starting to have more conversations with what I would call more kind of like institutional or bigger players. The sales process there is obviously much different than working with more crypto native companies. I think like, but for those companies with existing businesses, they're probably looking to bring, huge amounts of data and really large scale, workloads to the blockchain. Oftentimes if they're coming to us, it's because they've already done testing on other chains and they've found that using a general purpose chain just doesn't work. So oftentimes we don't need to convince them of that fact. They'll say, we tried to test this on XYZ blockchains testnet and we totally saturated it. Gas prices are super high, or they've like done the math already, and have come to that conclusion. If for some reason they haven't, like that's typically where we'll start, just because like that is kind of like the easiest way from the top of the funnel to eliminate all the obvious things that you can't go with, for those workflows. So if it's like a Carfax or something, like let's take a look at like all the data that we need to put on chain and think through what data availability layers could actually reasonably support that in a cost effective way. And then going down from there, a lot of it is very a lot of it's kind of like very like vibes based, I would say, for lack of a better term. Like when we typically work with teams in the crypto space and they ask which stack to use, we'll go through the technicals. It's often the case that multiple stacks fit their technical requirements, and so then it becomes a question of like alignment, future roadmap, etc. Like, do you want to make a bet on the OP community and the OP superchain? Do you want to make a bet on the ZK Sync Elastic Chain vision? Do you want to make a bet on Arbitrum and everything they're doing with clusters and Bold and like the other stuff that's being developed in the ecosystem? And so that's like the way that we typically kind of position this. If you're a larger player, there's also the kind of question of like, do you want to position this? How much do you want to position this as a blockchain thing? Like, do you want to be very public about your collaboration with us and with, let's say, like an Arbitrum, right? In some cases, the answer is yes, right? Like we weren't at all part of this deal, but we've seen like Robinhood and Arbitrum collaborating, and right, they've obviously both been extremely public about that fact. But there are other companies who, for various reasons, they might want to do this as kind of like a trial. Like we actually were working with a company a while ago that wanted to trial this, but they wanted to absolutely make sure that nobody knew they were using blockchain for like the first 6 months, and then they would go live and say, ta-da, everyone, like you're actually using a blockchain under the hood, and use that as a way to like gain trust with their users. This is a gaming ecosystem project that was very wary about how blockchain was being kind of perceived in the space at the time. So I mean that was like a bit of a tangent, but like basically it's very specific deal to deal. Start with the technicals, then move on to kind of like community alignment, how you want to position this, and then kind of like from both of those threads, we're typically able to make a pretty strong suggestion.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't really think too much on that note. Like, I think that was a good point, Rob, where like, okay, so there's actually companies coming out from outside of the crypto space wanting to build rollups. To me, just like, it was like, okay, there's a lot of application builders that want to come and launch their own chain. But I mean, it's more powerful to have people that are outside of space come in. But yeah, like you said, it's a harder sales cycle. There's a different sales cycle, really, which is it's good. It's good that you can take that business on as well.
Yeah, I think our philosophy around like selling into these companies has evolved over time, but it's always it's kind of like one of those things like enterprise crypto adoption. Everybody knows when it really happens, it's going to be huge. It's going to be like one of the biggest drivers of like net inflows into the crypto space, maybe like in history. And like it seems like every cycle there, it like seems like it might happen, and then it sort of happens, but not really. And so there's like a bit of a delicate balance for a team like ours where we know that the most reliable customers are crypto native projects. We know that, if like a great on-chain game comes to us and they say we want to build a modular blockchain, they're going to see that through. The project won't get canned or anything. Like, they'll eventually launch, and we can. It's a lot easier for us to like estimate how impactful that'll be to our ecosystem. With a lot of the more enterprise things, it's a lot more tentative, and there's a bit of a gamble. But we know, like, I think there will come a point in time where those types of applications make the bulk of activity on Caldera. It just we don't know when.
Yeah, it'd be cool. I'd like to talk more about kind of some of the downfalls you've seen with RaaS, and just kind of challenges you've had to face, as well as how you kind of are building to face those challenges and to kind of make a better product and grow an ecosystem for Caldera in a sense. But real quick, I can't help but ask, I keep putting this idea out into the ether of like the modular stack is not just three parts, it's expanding into a ton of different areas. Things like provers and like shared sequencers and like interoperability providers out of the box, and ZK coprocessors and these various infra parts. Like, is this going to happen? And like, is this part of what builders could eventually select on a Caldera build your own rollup type of interface? Like, how do you see these parts of blockchains of like this modular stack expanding? Am I on the right train of thought here? And is this going to happen like on Caldera?
Yeah, you're totally on the right train of thought. And all of the things that you mentioned are things that we're seeing and we're evaluating now. Now that we've become more active on the ZK side. So you mentioned, right, provers. It could be centralized proving systems, decentralized proving systems. There's also been this new trend of decentralized proof verification networks, which initially seems, honestly, it seemed a little silly, right? Because ZK proofs, the costly part is often proving, not verifying. But if you like do the math for like a ZK app chain, proving can become very, prohibitively expensive. And so, decentralized kind of verification networks are, I think, going to make a huge impact in this space. And then all the way up to more application level things like interop, chain abstraction, etc. I think our view is that all of these things are part of the modular ecosystem. I imagine someone will have an issue with that definition. They might say that modular is all the things encased by what was typically, like, if you imagine the quote unquote monolithic blockchain, right, like the Solana node, what does that entail, right? It has sequencing, it has DA, etc. It doesn't necessarily have like interoperability built into it. And so certainly some people will say, modularism is taking all the components of an existing blockchain node and then, modularizing them, in which case something like, a layer 0 wouldn't be part of. But, for all practical purposes, like when we're speaking to users, they care about, what the kind of default standard interop provider is just as much as the DA layer. So for us, and from a product perspective, we want to offer that choice. Like right now, we've been focused on that. I would say, that tighter version of modularity, DA, sequencing, execution. But we, like on our dashboard, we do eventually want to have the user press a button when they're deploying, and they get layer 0 or hyperlane or both automatically deployed to the chain. And so that's all definitely part of the vision for the future.
Nice. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I see it as well. Because then if we can get that, then like that the chain wouldn't have to go to hyperlane to like get set up or go to their docs or kind of do anything, as well as layer 0, or they would just kind of like permissionlessly click, and like something would have to happen underneath, but it would kind of do that integration for them. And I think that's how we truly scale these networks, is like if RaaS is the vending machine for all of these infra players, then like let's make it a vending machine where like I can actually go and get whatever snack I want. I can go get whatever part of the puzzle that I want. And so that to me is like particularly important, I think, for the long-term sustainability of these infra players and like the growth of their ecosystem. Having like if I'm a proof verification layer, for example, and like I should be able to have a a integration spun up without me ever even like knowing about it or seeing it until like it's done. And like I think that's like a big part of the crypto ethos.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it's, I think it's taken some time just on the technical level for a lot of teams to adapt to that. And so I think we're going to see a lot of like a big explosion of that sort of model in the next cycle, or I guess like the current cycle. Because for a long time, you didn't really need to do that, right? If you're like a chain link or something, not to pick on them, like it's okay having a very enterprise sort of sales motion for integrating new chains because there's max like three like legitimate new chains launching every quarter, let's say. Now that's no longer the case. And so for basically everything on the stack, explorers, interop, etc., I'm seeing like the integration process become a lot leaner. And I think very, very soon, a lot of these projects will move towards a more automated model. And then it'll be really easy for us to integrate that into our automated model. So it's all going to happen very soon.
Yeah, I got a similar question. And so at a high level, I think your answer would remain the same, that, eventually we'll get automated. Speaking about the interop providers, I'm curious more, because when all of these applications are deployed on their own VM or EVM or like a single VM, everything is easy, right? You just integrate that. But now with Appchains, we're going into multiple different virtual machines. So I'm curious, like, if that is the difficulty of connecting different virtual machines together, what is the bottleneck? Is the VMs the bottleneck, or is it something else? And if it is VMs, how are you guys kind of connected to all these different VMs? Which ones are you connected to? And generally, how do you see this explosion of new VMs playing out?
For now, we have been very focused on the EVM, though it's a little bit of a misconception that the EVM itself is a single like unified VM, right? In fact, oftentimes, basically every different stack has a slightly different implementation of the EVM, and they can all still be EVM equivalent, but you can't necessarily make the same assumptions across all VMs. And so that's certainly part of the problem. The nice thing about all these EVM equivalent chains is that they all still fundamentally follow the same kind of pattern and structure for sending a transaction, sending a message, doing a function call. I think as the number of VMs increase, we will need to see some standardization there. I actually think layer 0, while I'm not sure if that should be the de facto like standard for the entire space, you can tell they've spent a lot of time making sure that their protocol can be expanded to Solana and probably in the future Move and all these other VMs, like their messaging protocols. It doesn't rely on anything inherent to the EVM. And so when we're thinking about solutions for like cross rollup interoperability, that of course needs to be a given. Like, yeah, you're not going to have true cross rollup interoperability unless you have a messaging protocol that is adaptable to all different VMs in a relatively straightforward way. And so that's certainly part of the problem. And then another bottleneck that you alluded to as well is just like right now, there's not a super clear way for infrastructure providers to really build multi-chain. When they go multi-chain, what that really means is like they are making separate deployments on separate chains. It's not like a true multi-chain approach. Take a look at again, like this is literally true of every single infrastructure provider all across the stack. But if you want to make like a Gnosis safe deployment on one chain, what does that entail? It means spinning up an entire copy of the entire Gnosis safe system, the back end, the front end, everything, the contracts for that specific chain. Right. And that's true of oracles. That's true of a lot of interop providers, et cetera. And so one of the things that we're really focused on here as well is given, we're not necessarily working with like every single type of chain. We're going to be EVM or like EVM plus for quite some time, providing a stronger like unified developer interface to eventually hopefully allow these infrastructure providers to say like, we're going to build on all Caldera chains and have like a single unified entry point to allow them to do that. And then if we can accomplish that first of all, we solve a lot of problems for these infrastructure providers. They don't need to like spin up separate servers and a new DevOps team or something for every chain that they're launching on. And it also provide a lot of value to our customers and their users in that we can instantly, hopefully enable, new chains to have like the top infra already basically pre-deployed at launch.
Yeah, let's get more into that. Because that's what I was kind of alluding to, is like Rob's bringing up these challenges of RaaS and thinking of just launching new chains. We talked a lot about that. So you're saying that like Caldera's direction here is like thinking about this as like, okay, we don't just build and stand up a bunch of individual chains for individual projects, customers, etc., but we're trying to think about this more as like an ecosystem of chains within the Caldera network, or the kind of this connectivity layer. And basically we have this idea of like, okay, we can put these all together. The network effects that each get are stronger from each other, and as more and more are added, it kind of grows together. Maybe talk us through kind of how you're envisioning the next step for Caldera, and just for kind of why you think that this is important for RaaS providers as a whole.
I'll maybe tackle that kind of in the backwards order. I think that like this is really important for RaaS providers because we are in some sense, the ones that are enabling a lot of this fragmentation to happen. We're the ones that are helping all these new chains be launched. And while I think that's generally a very, net positive for the Ethereum ecosystem, like there are UX hurdles and developer experience hurdles that those, that this approach creates. And so it's pretty inherent into the long-term sustainability of this business and the Ethereum rollup centric roadmap in general, for us to also work on tackling these issues. Because I think, if we just assume someone else is going to do it, first of all, not a great foundation for the business, but also, us as a RaaS provider, like we're actually in a really strategic position to tackle some of these issues because the Caldera team, I think might be like one of, maybe 2 or 3 teams in the entire world who has experience running OP, Arbitrum, CK Sync, and Polygon CDK stacks, and is familiar with the inner workings of all of them. And as well, from our users' perspectives, like we have experience operating all of these stacks, right? We're doing sequencing for all of these rollups. They're all on a sort of single unified piece of cloud infrastructure with the same security assumptions across all of them. And so that puts us in a really strategic position to look at these problems and try to find a solution. What that means in practice, and one of the key areas of our research right now is building out solutions to allow both our rollups to interoperate and message each other, and also for external services, like I mentioned, these off-chain infra providers to basically message the rollups kind of all at once. The main kind of thread here is trying to on some level build kind of like a state machine over all of the rollups that we're running, and allow programs to run against that state machine rather than having to deploy to every rollup's state machine separately. And so when we're thinking about a solution like this, we're not trying to obviate or compete with any existing interop protocols or any existing standards that are being built, like the superchain or elastic chains, et cetera. Our users, first of all, want to be a part of those systems, and we don't want to prevent them from being a part of those systems. And also, we think that all of those systems are really a net good for Ethereum. But oftentimes they are themselves very siloed. And so we want to, optimally be kind of the bridge for all the rollups in our ecosystem to be able to communicate and interoperate with each other, across stacks, across different DA layers, and eventually potentially across different VMs, as you mentioned.
Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fraxtal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fraxtal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s and the entire app chain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fraxtal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or mainnet into the Fraxtal mainnet, bridge your tokens, and bring your Frax assets into the Fraxtal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fraxtal. You are still early. Join today, take part in our expedition into the singularity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, every little thing that you change, different DA, one rollup's using a Veil, one using Celestia, then there becomes complexities there. It scales out, exponentially with new VMs and things. But when I'm thinking about putting these together, so I'm thinking about, like, I'm a builder, I'm coming to Caldera. I'm not just coming to Caldera to build a rollup and to be like, have a chain. Like I'm joining the Caldera ecosystem. Like, why would I care to join the Caldera ecosystem? Like, what is in it for me that Caldera provides me as a builder that I can't really get elsewhere in this kind of vision?
Yeah. So to kind of go down the same thread, people like to talk about like sovereignty when it comes to blockchains. So in my view, it's sort of like joining like a multinational alliance, right? As like a sovereign nation. When people want to launch a blockchain, they want to do it, for a variety of reasons, but some combination of like control, sovereignty, customizations, like, being able to build a community, and those things are all still true if you're joining like a network of networks, right? Like an ecosystem of rollups. But I think, what you want as like, especially like a nascent rollup that's launching, is you still want to be part of some community and some ecosystem. You want to be able to interoperate natively with assets from other chains. You want access to other rollups communities. You want your users to not be siloed themselves and, be able to to move assets around and utilize applications on other chains while still, kind of viewing your chain as home. And, this will also, I think, allow for increased specialization between rollups, right? Like, let's say you're building a gaming rollup. You would rather maybe honestly not have to deploy a DEX onto that chain. You would want access to other people who are building DEXs on top of rollups and maybe options trading and perp trading, et cetera. So I think taking the sort of country metaphor, all the way to the end, right? You want those sort of like bilateral trade agreements with other countries. You want kind of code defense agreements with other countries. And I think the same is true for blockchains. Like it doesn't limit a chain's sovereignty to be able to work with other chains and being able to develop that kind of like natural alignment, being able to say from day one, when you launch your chain, you now have like a set of like friendly chains that you can interoperate with and work with very closely. I think is just going to be like a huge net good for a lot of the people who are launching chains. And I think the nice thing about what we're building from an ecosystem perspective is that we have amazing diversity in types of applications and communities that are building on Caldera, and also technical diversity. And so we're not really tied to any one standard or any one stack. We're going to be able to grow this ecosystem, this community across, hopefully an infinite and arbitrary number of stacks and DA layers and sequencing networks, et cetera. And hopefully we're going to be able to help all of those downstream communities as well. Like, I think, I like to think we've been like a huge asset to like the Celestia and Eigen and Near and Avail communities, as well as we, help projects build on those chains. And like, again, we're not really trying to like replace them, but we're trying to create bridges across these different communities and build something of our own that, just allows the rollups that are building with us to succeed.
Yeah, definitely. You really piqued my interest. And I know that we're kind of deep in the Caldera and the vision for RaaS 2.0, I guess you could call it. But maybe this is part of the vision as well. Like, is there a world where you could launch Eigenlayer AVSs in a RaaS setting, or like is there going to be a Rollup Eigenlayer AVS framework thing where like where I can just go and launch an AVS, or I'm not really sure how it works technically. So yeah, I mean, I'm just speculating here.
Yeah, that's a great question. The 100% honest answer is like we've definitely thought about it as an idea. We're still seeing if like we're well positioned to do that. We like the architecture for AVSs is very different from from running rollups, and so we just want to make sure that like if we do this, that we have like a natural advantage in doing it, and we can actually provide the best service. Candidly, I think the jury's still out on that, at least internally from our perspective. But it's
what's
a very,
the process now? Like, what's the process now to launch an AVS? Do you have to like work with the Eigen team and like do a specific way of launching it, or like is it difficult?
Yeah, so that's my understanding. I honestly don't have like, I'm not the best person to ask for this. But my understanding is you develop an AVS using the framework that Eigen has. Then through some process, that gets like transmitted to operators. I think that's probably a fairly kind of manual, right, relationship-based process at this point in time. And then those operators who are right, like these ETH stakers, you can go on their website and go down the list, kind of run it as like a sidecar to their like Ethereum node. I think like generally that is probably a good system. And like there are ways to improve it, probably making it more automated over time. But if that works, it works, and we're probably not going to enter the AVS hosting space. One of the kind of key insights of RaaS as it is right now versus all the blockchain as a service platforms that have been founded in the past and haven't really found traction is that rollups are very unique architecture where you're able to inherit decentralization properties of an underlying blockchain without needing to actually be decentralized yourself. So it's a sort of quasi decentralized system with strong centralized components, and that's really, really amenable to a cloud hosting platform product like ours. I think with like AVSs, the actual sales pitch is a little bit different, where you get decentralization more easily, which I think isn't as like we have like less of a role to play in a system like that, where it actually makes it really easy to decentralize chains. In the same way, like we haven't really touched like Cosmos SDK Tendermint style chains, because the real thing that solves is like, or the real issue there is like the coordination problem of getting validators on your chain rather than the technical problem of like actually running the validators themselves. And I think like Eigenlayer AVS is like in some sense
It's a similar
somewhat.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a business problem, and you guys are in the business of solving engineering problems.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Awesome.
Cool, man. Matt, I think that's about it from us. I mean, I'm genuinely excited to kind of see this next iteration of Caldera and how this rollup framework and ecosystem kind of grows. Yeah, man, any closing thoughts from your end?
Yeah, the only closing thought I would say is stay tuned. We've got a lot in the works, a lot of really great launches, new chains coming out, which I think will invigorate or reinvigorate the idea of like kind of launching a chain. And then, as you alluded to, a lot of new technical developments and new research developments that we'll be ready to share, fairly soon. And yeah, as well, I would just tell folks to keep an eye on the modular ecosystem. I think due to kind of recent price action, a lot of people have sort of lost touch with the space, maybe relative to 3 to 6 months ago. But generally, when people say like build in the bear, I don't really think we're in like a crypto bear market currently, but it is generally true that when the price action is weak, there are actually like a ton of builders working on things. And so both from us and from other people in the space, I know there are going to be some like really amazing things in the second half of this year. So folks should just keep their eyes open.
Awesome, man. Yeah, it's like a mini modular bear market based on like price action of DIM and TIA, and also just like not a lot of launches recently. I think people are waiting. So I think the second half of this year should be good, and I don't think that we're going to lose any conviction over here. So same for you.
Awesome.
Now, one more question for you. You those hats, are we gonna see those in Brussels?
Yeah, I will need to check. I think we should still have some remaining. If so, I will be able to hand them out to folks. Our swag game has honestly not been on point yet. That's also something that people should stay tuned for, as we've been working on some
Man.
design.
I love how you guys have been able to brand a shape. Like you guys have capitalized on the trapezoid, which resembles a volcano, right? And I did some research and Caldera is like the base of the volcano. As I understand it, the trapezoid looks like volcano, and yeah, really like how you guys put that together.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was a journey. You pay a designer $10,000 and then you end up with a regular trapezoid, right? But like he made that point as well. Like I think it's such a cool shape. It makes sense for what we're doing, being kind of like foundational to the modular space, hopefully. Nobody uses it, so hopefully the trapezoid becomes synonymous with Caldera worldwide pretty soon.
I hope you can. You guys can own this vending machine thing as well. This is fresh off the top of the head today. All right, man. Thank you, man. Cheers.
Cool. Thanks, guys. See you soon.